Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk, sponsored by Darling Inglis. My name's Bren O'Brien, and joining me as always is Tim Rowe. Today we take an in-depth look at the landmark ATC Racing New South Wales court decision and what it may mean. We discuss the newly established Patent Advisory Committee and the declining foal crop. How much is a slipper favourite worth? The future of state-based yearling sales. Which trainers travel the most? And what does that say about Australian racing? And Adrian Bott, the quiet achiever. Also, we look at how valuable is a Group 1 win to a mare. Finally, in wagering, we look at Andrew Vuris's comments on the importance of compliance, Entain's faith in the Australian market, and crypto casinos betting on Australian races. Tim, the biggest story of the week, no doubt, without doubt, was the Supreme Court decision yesterday. Justice Francois Kunz deciding that, or determining that Racing New South Wales' appointment of an administrator to the ATC was invalid. You and I spent a fair bit of time looking at this case and following it through live streams, etc. It was a big win for the ATC. As much as there's a lot of questions aren't answered here, it was a big win for the ATC because it allowed them to stay, free of that administrative role and kept the board in place.
Definitely, it was. We were both tuned into the court case yesterday, and Judge sort of opened up with his remarks that it's not about opinions whether Racing New South Wales should have attempted to put them into administration, and then you thought, oh, hello, that might be in trouble here, the ATC, and then no, it ruled that they're invalid on point of law with the Thoroughbred Racing Act, which is what the legal team of the ATC had argued for effectively the best part of 3 days, give or take. Racing New South Wales legal team sort of having their opportunity, and Racing New South Wales haven't come out and said whether they'll appeal yet, which is interesting. The perception was that the loser would appeal either side, whether it's ATC or Racing New South Wales. They haven't come out and said that. So there's probably a bit to play out, but it is a big win for those people, not just on the ATC, that have been arguing that Racing New South Wales have had too much overreach, I guess, or been allowed to under their perception of or interpretation of the Thoroughbred Racing Act, and why there's a review ongoing at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, we both sort of remarked a few times during the hearing in February that Justice Kunz was saying, where do I draw the line? And that was the key part. He pretty much identified that pretty early on about where the affairs sit and which sit on which side of the line. And he has ruled that Racing New South Wales's jurisdiction over clubs pretty much ends, or the line is drawn at what was determined as the galloping of horses, or effectively racing related matters. So matters around financial solvency or financial concerns, and matters around governance concerns aren't matters for Racing New South Wales that they can, under the current Thoroughbred Racing Act, they can do that. The other thing he did mention was, and it goes back to this hazard review that you mentioned before, he said that there is, he respectfully suggested that there is too much grey area in that particular section of the Act which determines Racing New South Wales's powers, and that it could do with a good look at, and that perhaps the Act, again, he's not in any position to say that, but he said respectfully suggested that the Act may need to be looked at. Now, we know Brad Hazard is doing that. We know he had a scope that was put forward to him by the Racing Minister, David Harris, to have a look at this. But I would think that, given what those comments, that, the New South Wales government have to come out and say, look, Brad Hazard, your scope has widened somewhat because there are concerns about these key aspects around how clear-cut Racing New South Wales powers are set out to be. It does change the scope, or certainly alter the focus of the scope of the review of the Thoroughbred Racing Act. All this put in the context of the fact that Brad Hazard's probably due to hand down, or due to at least complete his work around this in the next couple of months, or next month or so, certainly in terms of when he's paid until, then the state government have to review it. Then we're into a state government electoral cycle, and with David Harris admitting in estimates a couple of weeks ago that it's likely that most of any reform to the Thoroughbred Racing Act won't be done until after the election which is March next year. Suddenly we're a long way down the line, and we've got 18 months of uncertainty. So there's a lot of things, a lot of implications of this, isn't it, Tim? Beyond just the where Racing New South Wales sit and where the line's been drawn, the implications are much broader reaching around about the uncertainty that persists within New South Wales racing.
And I think if it gets to that point, and the recommendations are made, and what recommendations the government plans to adopt, I'd say it would become a political issue. The opposition would probably seize on that, given just the personalities involved at Racing New South Wales. That it will be a political issue that some politicians may see as an advantage to attack on. Leading up to the election. So I'm sure there's a bit to play out, and hopefully for the betterment of this industry, that government, whether that's the Labor government or whether coalition Liberals get in next year, that they tidy this up and there's very clear lines what can be done and what they're entitled to do, and regulator the clubs and all that sort of stuff, and everyone can move forward for the betterment of the industry. But maybe that's wishful thinking, but hopefully that's what happens.
Yeah, Dave Ozell, who's the shadow racing spokesman, issued a statement yesterday, Tim, which we'll have something on that in the straight today, which is basically saying that, calling on the government to create some clarity around the situation. It's clear that this is not, well, it's clear there's no clarity, I suppose, but put in the context, there is a likelihood of an appeal from Racing New South Wales, or a possibility of an appeal from Racing New South Wales. We'll probably find out about that in the next couple of days. It's certainly sort of changed. Well, I guess, I guess the challenge is, Tim, where does this sit in the context of the broader political discontent around New South Wales racing? Tim Hale, the ATC chairman, called afterwards for a united approach between Racing New South Wales and ATC. I've been following this ever since the straight started a couple of years ago when the Rosehill sort of thing broke and everything came out of that, Tim. I don't see how I don't see how this brings people together, I guess, Tim. The ATC may decide there may be a decision. I don't know. Does Racing New South Wales take a backward step on this? They haven't shown that so far. The political divisions and rancor within the New South Wales racing ranks are probably, certainly publicly, stronger than ever. There's a lot more people willing to come out and talk about the concerns they've got. On the other hand, we've got Racing New South Wales stating that record returns to participants. It seems to me like the gap between those who believe in one direction and those believe in another direction is bigger than ever.
And I think the one thing for sure, I think my personal view is probably more pressure on the Racing New South Wales board as a whole than certainly in a long time. There was 2 new members, including Jane Fleming, elected sort of late last year onto the board. I think it's time for them to, and the chair, Sarah Cook, to come out again and, probably prove where they're going, direction, and I guess we'll get an idea if they're appealing or not, where they're heading. But there is pressure on them to guide the way forward. They are the regulator of the industry, and as proven at the moment, do take in the majority of the wagering revenue and distributing that. So there's a lot at stake and a lot to play out, and hopefully there's some leadership there, particularly from the Racing New South Wales board.
Yeah, I think there's a broader challenge here around, around the perception of racing as well. Racing does a good job of fighting amongst itself. It's not a great view from the outside point of view. Now, look, there are key issues at play here. And if you have proper regulations and if you have proper laws, if you have a Thoroughbred Racing Act that's fit for purpose, which I'd argue from my personal opinion is no longer fit for purpose in New South Wales because it was formulated in the late 90s, has been updated along the way. But in that time, Racing New South Wales has gone from an organisation with revenue in the low millions of dollars to the now revenue in the sort of, $400-500 million range. It's changed. Like the industry's changed. The whole thing changed. This act should have been significantly reviewed when race fields came in and changed the whole dynamic of the PRAs. I think that should be happening across Australia, to be perfectly honest. What we're finding is that racing and the funding of racing moves quite quickly and it's quite a dynamic environment, but the political framework upon what it sits upon does not move fast enough. And so we've got a situation where, the political mechanisms which are supposed to keep racing in check are not moving at the same speed. And from my perspective, and my opinion is, it needs a thorough change, not just there's a few things. You've actually got to sit there and go, what's the framework racing wants in New South Wales, in Victoria, in Queensland, all these places. Otherwise, we're going to be stuck on these reviews every 5 or so years or 10 years, and highly paid public servants getting well rewarded for making a bunch of recommendations that never really get acted upon, and we don't actually get any movement forward. I think racing needs to break this cycle of it needs to evolve. It needs to have a way of keeping the political aspect behind it, keeping what I'm trying to say, keeping the regulatory stuff sorted and everything worked through. And I feel like we're way away from that at the moment. And this has been a long time coming. I would say that this is just the fact that the beast has grown too big for the cage that was put in. And that's, that beast is racing, not Racing New South Wales. The beast is racing. and it needs to be able to adapt accordingly. Tim, talking of politics and all things racing, we had an announcement yesterday that an independent committee of thoroughbred industry heavyweights has been appointed to provide advice to the Asian Patent Committee about which Australian races should be upgraded and downgraded. The formation of the Black Type Advisory Group, Racing Australia said the body's inaugural members would include Magic Millions Barry Bowditch, Inglis's Sebastian Hutch, Wooden Studs Anthony Thompson, Godolphin Australia's Managing Director Andy Mackiv, experienced industry figures Adrian Hancock, Arrowfield Studs, John Freya, and retired stud master and breeder Duncan Grimley. Can't doubt that, the quality of the people involved on that board, that advisory group. Tell me, Tim, what will they actually do? What is their role? Because the question around this stuff is we obviously know the Asian Patent Committee took over, or the Asian Racing Federation, through the Asian Patent Committee, took over our patent last year. What can we expect these gentlemen to be discussing when they get together, and how wed is the APC to actually take notice of their recommendations?
Well, what's interesting, I'm sure some of the people attached to Racing Australia and the PRA said we were going to have this committee or panel right from the start, and I know certainly, I think in Racing New South Wales statement last year on the website, sort of participants update, chairman's report suggested that they were going to, the thing was about that was, this committee could make recommendations that such and such a race should be downgraded, or the Premier Stakes, yes, on under ratings can be a Group 1, but it shouldn't be because, the main race is the Everest 2 weeks later and things like that. The panel, if Racing Australia were doing under their so-called plans last year, or probably 18 months ago, September 2024 it was, that they could just upgrade anyway and ignore this advice, where this panel going to the Asian Patent Committee for now might say, look, under the ratings, the system that's used to upgrade and downgrade races, yes, such and such a race, again, I'll use the Premier, should be a Group 1, but we're saying no because of, the number of Group 1 races there is, or stakes races in Adelaide, or, people will argue there's too many Group 1s in Melbourne, sprint races at the moment in the autumn. Does the Oakley Plate maybe should, be downgraded and things like that, or the William Reid. There's 4 Group 1 races, why can't Sydney? And I assume this panel that haven't met yet, they don't have a date to meet yet, will be making those recommendations in the short term to the Asian Patent Committee, and then hopefully, if Racing Australia can get its house in order, can reclaim that right to sort of determine how the patent calendar is made up. And then there was suggestions last night, as we saw, Bren, on our social reaction to that story, where the ratings experts, there is ratings experts and handicappers from the PRAs who meet. I think it's quite often. I think it's at least once a month, maybe once a fortnight over those things. So there's the ratings experts. These are the industry people that can probably, I'm confident they can put aside their own personal biases or state biases and about what races should be downgraded for the betterment of the industry. And, again, there'll be some hard decisions that need to be made because there hasn't been any changes for 10 years effectively, apart from a couple of Group 1s.
Yeah, I guess that, what it comes down to is, I guess from what you're saying, Tim, is that this committee will be a precursor to hopefully something moving forward where Australia regains its control of these things. It can show that it's, playing nicely enough that the APC doesn't have to come over the top and say, no, we're going to make the decisions. But look, it's a concern for Australian racing that doesn't have control of its own patent at the moment. But, I guess it hasn't had control of its patent for 10 years, given, the political sort of nature of what's been going on. I would think the last thing racing needs is another committee that doesn't do anything. You would hope that this committee, given the people involved, would have the power to actually influence and change and get things moving. But I would also, caution the fact that anything that's been stagnant for 10 years will take a long time to get going again. And so it may take longer than people think to actually make progress on these things. And as Rob Rorison said to you last year, Tim, he expects the amount of stakes races to actually go up in Australia, certainly in the short term, given what's going on. So it's an interesting situation. Hopefully it's one we can see some movement on. The following segment is brought to you by Inglis. Millionaire Generosity, winner of the Group 2 Challenge Stakes over 1,000 metres at Randwick on Saturday, is the latest mare to be confirmed for the English Chairman's Sale in May. In its short history, the Chairman's Sale has become one of the most significant events on the global bloodstock calendar. In 2025, fillies and mares off the track at the Chairman's Sale averaged a staggering $879,222. Highlight results at the 2025 The Chairman's Sale included Bella Nipotina at $4.2 million and Amelia's Jewel at $3.8 million. This year's format will mirror that of recent years, a late afternoon start at Riverside on Thursday, May 7th, with a Where's Elegance Meets Excellence theme. Each of the past two Golden Slipper winning colts, Stadium Side and Shinzo, were sold in utero at the Chairman's Sale. Other mares offered at the Chairman's include the dams of subsequent Group 1 winners Autumn Glow, Imperatriz, Home Affairs, Apocalyptic, She's Extreme, and International Star in Italian, amongst others. And the profile of the Chairman's Sale continues to grow with a series of big race results, with the dams of Group 1 Newmarket winner Caballas, Group 2 Riesling winner Cheyenne, and Group 3 winner Pinito all sourced at Chairman's, while Group 2 winner Paradoxium was sold in utero through the sale. Entries for the Chairman's Sale must close soon. Go to english.com.au for details. All right, Tim, I just want a quick chat about the future of state-based yearling sales. We've got the Gold Coast March yearling sale today, which is a bit of a new look for that. We've got Adelaide coming up. We've had Tassie and Perth. Shooting forward 5 years, and obviously Magic Millions sort of run a few of these, so just wary of that. I'm not saying it's a necessary, but from an industry point of view, is there support there to continue these state-based yearling sales? Do you feel, Tim, in the longer term, or does the format evolve and change?
I think there is, we can talk about the foal crop declining, but it still hasn't fallen off a cliff as such. So there's still, and most people are breeding to sell. They want to get them an opportunity to sell. So I think there is a place, as much as this horse is sold online, and she's Alibi is the greatest example of that. $10,000 on English Digital, what a superstar that she looks like being. But probably more than any other, well, certainly getting those horses in front of buyers. And I think the March sale now that's on Thursday, Friday, opening it up to all comers, I think is a positive. Adelaide next week. No secret, the South Australian industry, there's not nearly as many horses being bred over there. So I don't know what the longer term future is for Adelaide. Jerry Harvey did tell me in January that he's committed to it. He's been offered $30 million for that side and doesn't want to sell. But the building all around it, longer term, does it make sense? I'm not sure. I guess I would sell because I'd probably need the money, but Jerry doesn't. So there's that, but I think there's still an opportunity. Absolutely. Inglis have got the HTBA. They did get rid of the gold sale in Melbourne, but at the moment, I think HTBA serves a purpose as well. It's just, I guess, production costs. How much can breeders absorb going, I've got to pay accommodation, taking them to Sydney or Gold Coast or Adelaide versus what I can return. But while the foal crops, it's a supply and demand thing, and while the foal crop's going down slightly, there's maybe for the breeders that's a slight positive because there's fewer horses out there.
Yeah. I mean, we'll touch a quick breakdown on the foal crop. Obviously, we saw the numbers go down and again, and there's probably two arguments about the foal crop stuff, Tim, and I want to touch on that briefly. Was one is about that there's an efficiency point where you're producing the right amount of foals for the racing, the racing population you need, but there's a point where you get too low and you're not replacing what you need to. So, I mean, from your perspective, I think it's probably fair to say that the decline in foal crops will be disproportionately affecting those other states. Not the key New South Wales, Victoria, but the decline in Tassie, South Australia, Queensland to a certain extent, WA perhaps as well. That's probably a part of this too, isn't it, Tim? Just considering not only what the market wants and how the market's changed, but also the volume of product coming through.
Yeah, and then looking at the number of mares covered last year, it is going to fall again, probably more significantly than it did in 2025. But again, breeders are resilient. Everyone's been predicting it. Oh, I wrote a story in 2024 that it could go below 11,000. It didn't. People will still go, if you've got a mare, it's expensive to keep them in the paddock and not get them served. And there's lots of deals that can be done, and people are optimistic about, I want to breed a good horse. So I still think it's going to hold up okay. Again, it depends. I mentioned last week, I think, or it's all about expectations for your horse, where you see it. If you're taking a horse to Adelaide or March this week and it's your fourth or fifth cut sale, so to speak, you're probably, okay, well, I'm happy to get 30,000. But if it's your number one sale, makes it a lot tougher. I guess that's the advantage of scale. Arrowfield are selling a lot of horses up there this week at the Gold Coast, and generally they sell some in Adelaide as well through other vendors. They're probably happy with, or potentially happy with the results, because they've also got Easter and they've sold expensive colts at Magic Millions. But for the smaller breeder, I guess it is naturally getting tougher because just the production costs and service fees.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, and all of this in the context of the fact that the bloodstock market and the yearling market's actually going up, Tim, in terms of overall value at the moment. Like, this year has been a positive year so far, and we while some of the smaller sales are expected to probably struggle a little bit more than the bigger sales, you can actually get more return to yearling, but, again, costs are going up. Anyway, that's an interesting one. Speaking of costs going up, if you had Paradoxium, Tim, and if you did, you'd probably be a pretty happy man right now. Would you be looking to sell him to or do a stud deal with him before he goes to the slipper, giving his slipper favourite or closest slipper favourite? Or would you do what Jim Clark and what Richmond and the Cunninghams are doing and just, wait and see what happens at the slipper and then try to do a deal off the back of that?
Well, again, I'm conservative by nature, so I probably would try and sell down a little bit. But Jim's been through this before with Storm Boy, and the Cunninghams were, same colours as Storm Boy and Paradoxium. I guess he says they're not considering the offers and they're holding back. They don't want to be distracted 2 weeks before the slipper. Won the key lead up with Todman. I think it all comes down to how much money they'll probably potentially offered versus risk v reward. It comes down to there's still plenty of money out there for colts, but I think the stud farms that maybe were sniffing around and sort of expressing an interest, they more likely want it on their terms as well. Sure, there'd be big kickers if you won the slipper and things like that, but probably wanting to buy in at a lower price. Newgate have done it successfully previously. They bought him to stay inside after I think it was his second start, and he went and won the slipper. And they've great result for them. They also bought Profiteer, I think, just before he won the Millennium, and then there was there was definitely a kicker if he won the Millennium, and he didn't. He's at stud now, and probably didn't quite go reach the heights they were hoping. But I just feel that some of the studs, they're probably not as strong in terms of the deals have to be more on their side than the owners of the colt, and so that's for assume why probably Jim and Bjorn Baker and the connections in Ridgemont have said, no, let's just hold out and hopefully he can win the slipper, and then he is worth, well, he's by extreme choice, so let's say he's worth 25, 30, possibly 40 million, depending what he can go on and do. So at the moment they're going for the jackpot, and he's equal favourite, so definitely in the mix.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think probably complicated by the fact that both, two of the potential bidders on the horse, Newgate and Coolmore, have both got horses that they think can win the Golden Slipper. So, Newgate always got the colt that won a couple of weeks ago, and then, Coolmore are trying to get Central Europe into the race by the Pago this weekend. So it's an interesting one. I'll be interested to see how it plays out anyway. Other story I wanted to mention is trainers which travel the most. And what does it say about Australian racing? Tim, this story actually has gone gangbusters, to be perfectly honest. The run the numbers also always does pretty well, the article, but this week's been particularly strong. No surprises to see Kieran Maher has sent his horses to the most tracks so far this season, but 88 seems a lot. I don't know, how many tracks have you been to, do you reckon, Tim? I don't reckon I've been to 88. Kieran Maher's been to 88. Well, Kieran Maher's horses have been to 88 across Australia this year alone.
I haven't sat down and worked it out. That's something I need to do one day, what racetracks I've been to. I've been to quite a few. I guess it's symptomatic of the changing of the industry and the mega stables and the biggest, the trainers are prepared to travel a lot further now to get winners in New South Wales. Victoria was always sort of, you could travel, just the way it's laid out. The state, you can pretty much, every trainer can get to almost every racetrack without too much ease. Even Mildura is only sort of 4 or 5 hours or 5 hours. And, from Sydney, trainers can go up north 5 hours and 5 hours south, and the Albury Carnivals next week. It'll be interesting to see how many Sydney and Melbourne trainers attend that carnival. I think I might have even got a share one coming all the way from Ballarat. I hope the float fee's not too expensive there, Henry. Yeah, I think it's about placing the horse. The owners want to get winners, but also from a trainer's perspective, holding on to those clients as well. In the old days of, no, this horse isn't going to cut it, sell it, or the owner will move it on to, I'll place it with my country trainer or things like that. That doesn't tend to happen as often now, and English Digital's got a bit to do with that. And I think the trainer's wanting to hold on to the owner as much as the horse.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. If you look back through the record, like, Victorian trainers do, Victorian-based trainers or Victoria trainers with a primarily Victorian base do tend to travel to their horses to more tracks. And I think that, as you mentioned, that's because of Victorian tracks that tend to be closer together and closer to metropolitan regions. But, if you look at the case like, for example, Tony and Calvin McAvoy, they've been to 48 different tracks. They've only had 286 different runners. That means that, it's every 6 starters. Like, that's quite remarkable in that regard. So, yeah, I mean, and there's similar high numbers for, like, Big Price and Michael Kent Jr., Anthony and Sam Freedman. As a more point of comparison, Chris Waller's only been to 48 tracks. Because Chris Waller's runners, Annabelle and Rob Archibald have got a tri-state operation. They've been to 67. Bjorn Baker, who often cops a little bit of spray to send his horses to far-flung places or whatever else, he's only been to 30 different tracks for his horses this year. So relatively low compared to some of those around him. The Queensland trainers tend to stay within their zone. Tony Gollan, for example, has had 759 starters this year and only been to 20 different tracks. So, that makes sense. Queensland spread out, all those type of things. It's also a different structure in New South Wales racing to Victorian racing because New South Wales has the provincial and country sort of structure as opposed to Victoria, which doesn't have that delineation. So a little bit of an interesting one of that. Talking about trainers and talking about big trainers, I urge you to check out an article on Adrian Bott this week. Jess, I always had a chat with him about, I guess, his role, 10 years this year working with Gay Waterhouse. It's a fascinating partnership. All partnerships are different. And I urge you to have a look at that and work through that. Finally, Tim, in this space, I just wanted to have a quick look at this week's Group 1 event, which was the Coolmore Classic. Of course, we know the Coolmore Stud Stakes is one of the primary stallion makers, but the Coolmore Classic has been a mare maker. You only got to look at recent winners like Zugotcha and Espiona, who sold for, I think $4 and $5 million respectively in that range. The value of a Group 1 race to a mare, we talk about stallions, is significant in a broodmare market that's really strong at the moment.
Definitely, you've got some on our notes here, Savvy Halley, 3-year-old doing a great job by Hellbent and Verona Rose at Castelvecchio mare, and someone told me yesterday they thought she was worth $3 million already, insured for 2 and probably worth 3. So just the value. And Lazura is an interesting one for B2B thoroughbreds, really talented mare, and they've putting generosity in the chairman's sale. I guess they bought her privately, and whether they keep her or whether they sell her, will do very well out of that. Just those high-end mares are they're hard to get, and you've got to fend off the Yulongs and the Coolmores to buy them, but they are worth a lot of money. And if you can win if you can win multiple Group 1s and prize money, I'm not sure. I think you maybe even told me, Bren, where the valuation is prize money helps value mares, but I don't think it's that simple anymore. Where if you win $2 million, you're worth $2 million. I think it's a bit more complicated than what it was maybe five plus years ago.
Yeah, I think the market's a much more premium towards those premium mares. It's a race that's produced the Coolmore Classic has produced winners of the ilk of Emancipation, Assertive Lass, Red Express, and Eskimo Queen in history, all of which produce Group 1 winners going forward. So it does have a record producing mares that produce good horses. Not so much in recent years, but certainly more so in history going back a little bit. And as I mentioned before, Zigotcha and Espiona are both horses that have got, extremely high price tags on them, and have we're looking to go forward with that. Following segment is brought to you by Darley. Darley's sires continue to perform extremely well at the recent English Premier Sale. They featured in 3 of the 5 top 5 lots, with $750,000 for a 2-darn hot colt, $625,000 for a filly by Kermadec, and a son of Gayaf securing $520,000. The progeny of Animo, Harry Angel, Street Boss, Pinatubo, and Blue Point were all strong demand across the Victorian sale. That comes after the progeny of emerging Darling Stallions provided the top 2 prices at Ingles Classic, the top price at Tasmania, and the third top price in Perth. Buy Darley in 2026. Finally, Tim, we'll quickly round off some wagering news here. And interesting story during the week, Andrew Vuris, the CEO of Entain Australia and New Zealand, coming out and talking about the importance of compliance. Obviously, Entain under a fair bit of scrutiny around their compliance at the moment, given the Austrac investigation, but basically saying if legitimate, regulated gambling providers or wagering providers in Australia want to be respected by the market, respected by their customers, they must take compliance seriously. And clearly a strategic step for Entain to show, hey, look, we're cleaning up our own shop here. We're taking care of this and putting ourselves forward. And that comes off the back of Entain showing some faith internationally during the week when announcing its annual results and saying that it expects the Australian market to return to growth, or the Australian segment of its business to return to growth this year. So It's been a very difficult 12 months for Entain. We've talked about it a lot, but it appears they're keen to put things in the rearview mirror, albeit that Austrac action is still pending, Tim.
Yeah, I haven't dived into it as much as you have, Bren, but yeah, it makes sense what Andrew's suggesting. It does come at a significant cost to the wagering operators on top of the taxes and everything that they're obligated to pay. So it's just, I guess, again, another disadvantage versus the ones that are operating in the grey or black markets that don't have to certainly pay as much, or just the cost of doing business on the in the legal field.
Just a final one there, an article we go up today on the Straight to have a look at. It was a report put out by IFA, the International Horse Racing Federation, about the amount of crypto casinos operating on New Zealand and also Australian racing. Surprisingly enough, there are 52 overseas operators at least operating on Australian horse racing, which provides that brighter challenge around that grey market, black market sort of space and what that looks like. And they have access, obviously access to run race books effectively on that stuff. So interesting time. There'll be a story about that today on the Straight. I urge you to have a look at that. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by Darling English. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast. Be sure to subscribe. Also, subscribe to thestraight.com.au. Check out our office today. Send us an email if you want to talk to us about any stories we should be covering. Editor at thestraight.com.au. Thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you again next week.